After my grandparents were killed in a car accident, their attorney disclosed that I was the only heir to their $26 million estate. My relatives insisted I give it up. I refused. That same night, they threw me out. I moved into my grandparents' house. The following day, they showed up to evict me, but froze when they saw who was standing next to me. Their faces went pale in shock. You think you know your family, right? That they love you, support you, always have your back? Well, I thought the same thing, until a $26 million inheritance ripped off the mask and revealed a truth so ugly, so utterly ruthless, it felt like a betrayal from every single one of them. How far would your family go for money? Because mine, they tried to make me homeless, disowned me, and then launched a full-scale attack. You will not believe what happened next. My name is Natalie, I'm 27, and until 6 weeks ago, my life was, well, it was ordinary. I was a kindergarten teacher, living paycheck to paycheck in a small apartment, just getting by. But my life changed forever, not because of some lottery win, but because of a devastating tragedy. The two people who truly saw me, who raised me, my grandparents, were gone. They died in a terrible crash, and I was shattered, absolutely broken. Then, just weeks later, came the lawyers' meeting, where I learned they'd left me their entire $26 million estate. $26 million. And suddenly, the family who barely knew my grandparents, who hadn't visited them in years, crawled out of the woodwork, demanding everything. I said no, and that's when things got really, really dark. If you want to see just how ugly money can make people, trust me, you're in for a story. My own parents, Richard and Diane, were complicated, physically present, sure, but emotionally, they were miles away. My dad, Richard, was obsessed with climbing the corporate ladder, working 60-hour weeks. My mom, Diane, was busy networking in all the right social circles. Family dinners were a rarity, and when they did happen, my parents were usually glued to their phones, distracted by work calls or planning their next big social event. They provided the basics, but warmth, guidance, emotional connection, those were in short supply. From the age of 5, my true home wasn't with them. It was with my grandparents, Elizabeth and Harold. Every weekend, every summer, I was at their modest 4-bedroom house, which, to me, felt like a mansion filled with love. My grandparents were incredibly wealthy. They built a logistics empire from the ground up, starting in their garage with one truck. By the time I was born, Alexander Logistics was a powerhouse. But you would never know it. Grandpa drove the same beat-up pickup truck for 20 years. Grandma clipped coupons. They taught me that character matters more than cash, that money is just a tool to build something meaningful, not to impress people who don't matter. That philosophy, it was a direct clash with my father. He, their only son, grew up expecting to inherit a life of luxury. He resented their frugality, calling them stingy and old-fashioned. They paid for his college, but made him work summer jobs. They helped him with a down payment on a starter home, not the luxury condo he demanded. The final straw came when he demanded a senior position in their company, despite having zero experience. My grandparents, true to their principles, refused, telling him he had to earn it. He stormed out, took a corporate job, and their relationship never recovered. For me, it was different. They paid for my education in full, but encouraged me to follow my passion, not profit. When I chose to be a kindergarten teacher, earning barely above minimum wage, they were genuinely thrilled. They respected my independent spirit. We had standing Sunday dinners. I'd help them with new tech. They'd share family recipes. I spent holidays with them, not my parents, which my mother took as a personal insult. My apartment was small, cozy, filled with secondhand furniture and plants. My teacher's salary was modest, but it was enough. I found joy in simple things, reading, hiking, volunteering. And my grandparents, being them, would occasionally surprise me with practical gifts, new winter tires, a high-quality blender. They just got me. Then 6 weeks ago, my whole world shattered. I was grading papers one Tuesday evening when the call came. The police. My grandparents, driving home from their favorite little restaurant, hit by a drunk driver. Instantly gone. The officers said they didn't suffer, but that brought me zero comfort. None. The funeral? It was a blur of grief and disgust. My parents, suddenly in charge, were arguing with the funeral director about costs. My brother, Jason, flew in from California, barely looking up from his phone. My Aunt Pam, my dad's sister, was weeping dramatically for the cameras, then snapped out of it the second they were gone. Her husband, Uncle Steve, just hovered awkwardly. None of them had visited my grandparents in years, yet here they were, performing the role of the grieving family. I just felt numb. The two people who truly understood and supported me gone. Their home, once so full of life and warmth, now an empty shell. I couldn't even bring myself to go inside after the service. I went back to my tiny apartment, took bereavement leave from school, and just tried to breathe. 2 weeks later, Matthew Goldstein, my grandparents' attorney, called. He asked me, and my immediate family, to come to his office for the reading of the will. I had no idea, absolutely no idea how much that meeting would upend everything I thought I knew about my family, how it would expose the darkest parts of them. The morning of the will reading felt as gray and miserable as I did. I got to Matthew Goldstein's office early. It was a beautiful old Victorian, warm and inviting, a stark contrast to my mood. Matthew, a kind man with silver hair and genuinely sad eyes, greeted me. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Natalie," he said quietly. Elizabeth and Harold were extraordinary people. His sincerity brought tears to my eyes. Then, the door burst open. My family arrived. All at once. My father, Richard, swept in first, already checking his expensive watch, impatient. He looked like an older, harder version of my grandpa, but with zero warmth. My mother, Diane, floated in after him, her designer handbag probably worth more than my yearly salary. My 25-year-old brother, Jason, swaggered in, wearing sunglasses indoors, his idea of business casual, a wrinkled shirt and jeans. Behind them, Aunt Pam, my father's younger sister, was loudly complaining into her phone about some slight from her country club friends. Uncle Steve, her husband, just trailed behind, offering me a quick, nervous nod before averting his eyes. He rarely spoke, and I don't think I'd ever had a real conversation with him. "Well, let's get this over with," my father boomed. No greetings, just demands. Some of us have actual businesses to run. Matthew, calm as ever, just smiled thinly and led us to the conference room. The tension in that room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My father took the head of the table, as if claiming authority. I chose a seat near Matthew, who was at the opposite end. The rest of them arranged themselves in their usual alliances, Mom next to Dad, Jason next to her, Pam and Steve across. "Before we begin," Matthew stated, his voice clear, "I want to clarify that Elizabeth and Harold were of completely sound mind when they updated their will last year. They were thorough in their considerations and explicit in their wishes." My father snorted. "Just read it, Matt. We know how this goes. Dad built the business. I'm his son. Standard procedure." Matthew ignored him, opened a leather portfolio, and began to read. The formal legal language droned on. My family shifted impatiently, practically vibrating with anticipation. Finally, he reached the part everyone was waiting for. "We hereby bequeath our entire estate, including but not limited to approximately $8 million in cash assets, an investment portfolio valued at $12 million, all real estate holdings, including our primary residence, valued at $5 million, and our 25% ownership stake in Alexander Logistics, valued at approximately $1 million. He paused, and the room was absolutely silent. I held my breath. "To our beloved granddaughter, Natalie Grace Foster." The world stopped. I stopped breathing. $26 million. To me. I thought I had misheard him. It couldn't be right. Matthew continued, his voice steady. "We specifically and intentionally make no provisions for our son, Richard Alexander, our daughter-in-law, Diane Alexander, our grandson, Jason Alexander, our daughter, Pamela Davis, or our son-in-law, Stephen Davis, as we have provided for them during our lifetime, and have made our reasons clear to our attorney." Chaos erupted. "Let me see that!" my father roared, leaping up so fast his chair crashed backward. He snatched the document from Matthew's hands, scanning it frantically. "This is ridiculous!" My mother joined in, her voice rising to a shriek. $26 million to a kindergarten teacher? She wouldn't know the first thing about managing that kind of money. Jason slammed his hand on the table. "What about me? I'm family, too. I need startup capital for my business ventures." Aunt Pam spun on me, her face flushed with pure, unadulterated anger. "What did you do? How did you manipulate them into this?" I just sat there, frozen in utter shock. My mind couldn't even process it. Matthew, calm as a cucumber, gently retrieved the will from my father's trembling hands. "If you will all please take your seats," he said, his voice firm. "There is more." Harold and Elizabeth recorded a video message to be played at this time. He pressed a button, and a large screen illuminated, and there they were, my grandparents, sitting side by side on their living room sofa, just as I'd seen them so many times. My heart clenched. Seeing them alive again, looking exactly as they had the last time I visited, it was a gut punch. Grandpa Harold spoke first. "If you are watching this, it means we have passed on. We want to explain our decisions directly to prevent any misunderstandings." Grandma Elizabeth continued, her voice gentle but firm. "Richard, Pam, we love you as our children. But we have been deeply disappointed by the values you have embraced and passed to your own children with the exception of Natalie." For minutes, they explained it all. How they'd watched my father and aunt prioritize material wealth over genuine relationships, treating them as a resource to be exploited, not as parents to be cherished. They detailed years of missed family events, loans never repaid, dismissive attitudes toward their modest lifestyle. "The business we built," Grandpa said, "was never about amassing wealth for its own sake. It was about creating security for our family and opportunities for our employees. We built it through hard work, integrity, and treating people fairly." "Natalie," Grandma added, her eyes softening. "She's the only one who has demonstrated these values consistently. She visits us not because she wants something, but because she genuinely cares. She chose a career helping children, despite the low pay, because it fulfills her purpose. We trust Natalie," Grandpa finished, "to be a good steward of what we have built. She will honor our legacy and use these resources wisely, not squander them on status symbols or get-rich-quick schemes." The video continued for several more minutes, my grandparents outlining their hopes for how the inheritance could support education and community development, areas they'd always cared about but never had time to fully address. As the screen went dark, my father exploded. "This is absolute garbage. They were clearly senile. We'll contest this will. No judge will uphold this insanity." Matthew, perfectly calm, just shook his head. "They anticipated that response, Richard. They underwent extensive cognitive testing before finalizing this will, with multiple independent doctors certifying their competence. Additionally, they documented years of behaviors that informed their decision. I must advise you that contesting will be extremely difficult, expensive, and unlikely to succeed." My mother, Diane, suddenly turned to me, her voice syrupy sweet. "Honey sweet Natalie, darling, you understand this isn't right. Your grandparents were confused. This money belongs to the family, not just you. You'll share it with us, won't you?" I felt utterly cornered, all eyes burning into me. I have to think about this," I stammered, barely able to speak. "I had no idea they would do this." "Think about it," Jason scoffed. "There's nothing to think about. That money should be divided equally or managed by someone with actual business experience." He glared at my father, clearly implying himself. As the arguing intensified, Matthew gently touched my arm. "You don't have to decide anything today, Natalie. Take time to process. My office will handle all immediate matters related to the estate." He handed me a thick envelope. "This contains all relevant documents, keys to their house, and contact information for their financial advisors. Call me anytime with questions." The meeting dissolved into utter chaos after that. Threats of lawsuits, accusations flying back and forth. Matthew finally asked everyone to leave. As we filed out, my father grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly rough. "This discussion is not over," he hissed. "Come to our house tonight at 6. We will sort this out as a family." His tone made it clear. This was not a request. I nodded numbly, too overwhelmed to even argue. As they drove off in their separate luxury vehicles, I sat alone in my 10-year-old sedan, clutching that envelope, wondering how an inheritance meant to be a blessing had so quickly become a living, breathing curse. I spent the afternoon in a daze, just driving. The envelope from Matthew sat on my passenger seat, a $26 million burden. Part of me wanted to tear it open, understand the enormity of what my grandparents had entrusted to me. Another part was just terrified. Terrified of the responsibility, terrified of what was coming. At 5:45 p.m., I pulled into my parents' driveway. Their 5,000-square-foot house loomed over me, all granite and cold glass, designed to impress, never to welcome. Everyone was already there. I took a deep, shaky breath, grabbed the envelope, and went inside. They were waiting in the formal living room, a room usually reserved for my mom's pretentious social gatherings. My father stood by the fireplace, a tumbler of scotch in his hand, his eyes burning into me. My mother perched on an uncomfortable-looking designer chair. Jason sprawled on the sofa, scrolling his phone, completely oblivious. Aunt Pam paced nervously, while Uncle Steve stared out the window, looking like he wished he was anywhere else. "Sit down, Natalie," my father finally commanded. I chose a chair near the door, a quick exit strategy already forming in my mind. "Let us be reasonable about this," he began, his business negotiation voice in full effect. "Your grandparents clearly weren't thinking straight. They meant for the family to benefit, not just you." My mother nodded furiously. "Sweetheart, managing wealth is complicated. Your father has the experience to handle this properly. You can still get a nice portion, perhaps enough for a down payment on a real house instead of that apartment." The sheer condescension in her voice made my skin crawl. But I stayed silent. Emboldened, my father continued. "Here's what we propose. You sign over the entire estate to me as the financial head of the family. I'll ensure everyone gets their fair share. You'll receive 10%, which, frankly, is more than generous considering your limited needs. 10%. I finally found my voice. 10%. That's still over $2 million. Exactly. Jason jumped in, finally looking up from his phone. More than enough for a teacher. I need at least $5 million for my cryptocurrency exchange platform. It's going to be huge. I just stared at him. Jason, whose last venture, an app for rating public restrooms, had burned through $50,000 of my parents' money in 3 months. A wave of bitter cynicism washed over me. "The house should go to us," Aunt Pam interjected, her eyes narrowing. "We have 3 children to consider. That neighborhood would give them access to better schools." I almost laughed out loud. Aunt Pam had never once visited my grandparents in that house. Her children, my cousins, were practically strangers to me, sending obligatory birthday cards with Pam's handwriting. As the evening wore on, their tactics shifted. Demands turned to guilt. "After all we've done for you," my mother wailed, her eyes dramatically moist. "We gave you life, a good home, opportunities. Is this how you repay family loyalty?" I nearly choked. Loyalty? When was the last time either of them called just to check on me? When had they ever attended one of my school performances? My father changed strategies again. "We're not asking, Natalie. We're telling you what will happen. Either you sign the transfer documents voluntarily, or we will contest the will. We'll bring up every questionable interaction you had with your grandparents. How often did you visit them alone? What did you tell them about us when we weren't there? It will get ugly." The threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. I felt sick to my stomach, but something inside me hardened. A memory flashed. Grandpa Harold, teaching me to stand my ground during a playground dispute when I was 8. "No one can take your dignity unless you give it away, Natalie," he'd said. "Know what is right and hold firm." Uncle Steve, who'd been silent this whole time, suddenly spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. "Maybe we should all calm down and give Natalie some time to think. This is a lot to process." My father rounded on him. "Stay out of this, Steve. This is family business." Steve, quiet and defeated, immediately retreated into himself. As the clock ticked past 9, Jason was already drafting transfer paperwork on his laptop. My mother was on the phone with their personal attorney, discussing wording. Aunt Pam was scrolling through real estate listings for my grandparents' house, talking about which walls she'd knock down first. They had already divided my inheritance without my consent, mapping out how they'd spend every single dollar. Not once did anyone mention my grandparents' wishes or legacy. Not once did they ask what I thought should be done with the money. At 10:30 p.m., my father printed out a crude transfer document and slid it across the coffee table to me, along with a pen. "Sign it," he demanded. "Now." I picked up the paper, my fingers trembling slightly, and read it. The language was vague, but the intent was clear. It signed away all my rights to anything my grandparents had left me. In exchange, I would receive a percentage to be determined later, solely at my father's discretion. I put the pen down. I took a deep, steadying breath. The room went silent, all eyes on me waiting. "What did you just say?" my father asked, his voice dangerously low. "I said no," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. "I will not sign this, or anything like it. My grandparents trusted me with their legacy for a reason, and I intend to honor that trust." My mother launched into a tirade about ingratitude. Jason called me names I won't even repeat. Aunt Pam started sobbing dramatically about her children's future. Through it all, I sat still, the word no becoming a shield around me. Finally, my father slammed his glass down so hard it cracked. "That is enough," he roared, standing over me. "I always told your mother you weren't to be trusted. You manipulated them, just like you're trying to manipulate us now with this innocent act." He stalked toward me, pointing a finger inches from my face. "You have a choice to make right now, Natalie. Either you sign that paper and remain part of his family, or you take your precious inheritance and consider yourself disowned. You cannot have both." The ultimatum hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I looked around at the faces of my family members, searching for any flicker of love, any shred of understanding. I found none. In that moment, a painful truth crystallized. They had never really seen me as family. I was just a means to an end, a potential source of money, nothing more. "I'm not signing," I said firmly, standing up. "I'm sorry you feel this way, but I have to respect what Grandma and Grandpa wanted." "Then get out of my house," my father snarled. "Pack your things and leave tonight. You are no longer welcome here." "I live in my own apartment," I reminded him, my voice flat. "I have for years." He laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "The apartment we co-signed for because your teacher's salary couldn't qualify for the lease? Check your agreement, Natalie. We own that building through one of our investment companies. Consider your lease terminated." My stomach dropped. A cold, nauseating realization hit me. He was right. Years ago, when I couldn't qualify, they'd helped me. I never realized they literally owned the building through a shell company. "You have 30 minutes to pack essential items," my mother said, checking her watch, utterly devoid of emotion. "The locks will be changed tomorrow." I stood there, frozen in shock. They were actually doing it, kicking me out, making me homeless, over money they had never earned, money that was never theirs. "Clock's ticking," Jason smirked, leaning against the doorway with a smug expression. "Better hurry, sis. Those 26 million won't keep you warm tonight." 30 minutes. 30 minutes to pack up my entire life. I moved on autopilot, grabbing clothes, toiletries, important documents, a few sentimental items. My mind was reeling. How could they do this? How could money turn my family into complete strangers? My father stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom, arms crossed, watching me like a guard overseeing a prisoner's transfer. My mother was already downstairs, on the phone with a real estate agent about selling my grandparents' house. Her voice drifted up the stairs, casually discussing renovations. "You were never really part of this family anyway," my father said coldly, as I stuffed clothes into a duffel bag. "Your mother and I were going to divorce before she got pregnant with you. You were the obligation that kept us together." The casual cruelty of his words staggered me. I had always sensed I was unwanted, but having it confirmed so bluntly, so heartlessly, it was another matter entirely. "We've wasted enough time and money on you," my mother added, appearing in the doorway. "Your private school tuition, braces, summer camps, all those dance lessons you were terrible at. Consider this the end of our investment." Investment. Not love. Not care. Investment. As if I were a stock that had performed poorly. Jason appeared next, leaning against the wall with that infuriating smug look. "You'll regret this when you have nothing and no one," he sneered. "That money will run out faster than you think. And then what? You'll come crawling back, and we'll remember how you chose cash over family." I zipped up my final bag, fighting back tears, a burning resolve to not cry in front of them. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "Is that everything?" my father demanded, his voice sharp. I looked around the room, which had been mine since childhood, though I'd only stayed here occasionally since college. My ballet trophies, my framed diploma, the bookshelf overflowing with novels. So much left behind. I can come back for the rest later, I said. My father laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. There won't be a later. Whatever you leave tonight goes to charity, or the trash. Your call. The finality of it hit me, like a physical blow. They were erasing me. From their lives, from their history. All because I wouldn't give them money they had done nothing to earn. I grabbed my grandmother's quilt from the bed, stuffing it into my already overflowing bag. That I would not leave behind. With 3 bags slung over my shoulders and another in my hand, I made my way downstairs. No one moved to help. At the front door, I turned around one last time. My family stood in a line, their faces a grotesque tableau of anger, disappointment, and smug satisfaction. You might have money now, my mother said, her voice dripping with fake pity. But family is forever. You'll realize what you've thrown away. I'm not the one throwing away family, I replied quietly, my voice cracking slightly. You are. With that, I walked out the door and into the cool night air. The door slammed behind me with a sickening finality, echoing the chasm that had just opened between us. Standing by my car in their driveway, the cool night air biting my skin, the full weight of everything hit me. I was effectively homeless. My apartment gone. My family gone. In the span of a few hours, I'd gained millions, but lost the only support system I'd ever known, however flawed it had been. I finally let the tears come. Great, heaving sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for my grandparents, their absence a raw wound. I cried for the family I'd always longed for, but never truly had. Mostly I cried for myself. Adrift. In a world that had completely changed. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, I wiped my eyes and started the car. I had nowhere to go. Friends. Explaining this seemed impossible at nearly midnight. Hotels. I didn't have the credit for that. Then, like a beacon in the darkness, I remembered the envelope Matthew had given me. I pulled it out, and there, nestled amongst the papers, was a set of keys, with a familiar, rabbit-shaped keychain, my grandmother's. The keys to their house. The house that was now, unbelievably, mine. The drive took 20 minutes. With each mile, I felt the strange push and pull, drawn to the comfort of their home, yet terrified of entering it without them. I'd avoided it since the funeral, unable to face the emptiness. The porch light was on when I arrived, a small flicker of welcome. I sat in the driveway for a long moment, gathering courage. Finally, I grabbed one bag and approached the front door, the keys shaking in my hand. The moment I stepped inside, the familiar smells enveloped me. Grandma's lemon verbena potpourri, Grandpa's wood polish. I flipped on the lights, half expecting to hear their voices calling out a greeting from the kitchen. The silence was deafening. I made my way to the guest room, the one I'd always used, and dropped my bag on the bed. Everything was exactly as I'd left it after my last weekend visit, just a month before the accident. The novel I'd been reading, still on the nightstand with a bookmark. Fresh towels folded on the dresser, placed there by my grandmother in anticipation of my next stay. The thoughtfulness of it, the expectation of a continuity that was now brutally broken, undid me again. I sank onto the bed and just cried, until exhaustion finally claimed me, and I fell asleep, fully clothed on top of the covers. Morning came with a disorienting brightness. For a split second, I expected the smell of coffee, Grandpa's off-key whistling. Then reality crashed down. They were gone, and somehow I had inherited not just their fortune, but their enemies, all in the form of my own family. My phone had exploded overnight. Texts and missed calls, mostly from my father and mother. Some were thinly veiled threats, others were sudden, saccharine attempts at reconciliation. "We can work this out if you'll just be reasonable," one message from my mother chirped. My father was less subtle. "You have 24 hours to reconsider before we file suit." Jason's text was chillingly blunt. "Enjoying the big empty house? Not for long." That last one sent a shiver down my spine. It sounded like a genuine threat, not just bluster. I forwarded it to Matthew. He responded immediately. "Stay where you are. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Do not open the door for anyone else." His urgency was alarming, but it also offered a strange comfort. At least someone was on my side. Matthew arrived exactly 30 minutes later, briefcase in hand, a cardboard carrier with 2 coffees. I ushered him into the kitchen, and we sat at the breakfast nook my grandparents had used for casual meals. "First things first," he said, sliding a coffee toward me. "Your family has already contacted 3 different attorneys about contesting the will. I anticipated this and have prepared countermeasures." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. They kicked me out last night. My father apparently owns my apartment building through some investment company. Matthew nodded grimly. Typical Richard tactics, using leverage to force compliance. He started pulling documents from his briefcase. "What he didn't tell you is that your grandparents provided for this exact scenario." He showed me a deed to a small cottage, 20 minutes outside town. "Your grandmother bought this property 5 years ago, kept it in a separate trust for you. Richard doesn't know about it. You have somewhere to go if you need it." Relief washed over me. At least I wouldn't be homeless. But the idea of hiding out while my family circled like vultures didn't sit right. "There's something else you should know," Matthew continued. "You're not alone in this. Your grandparents had many loyal friends and associates who understood the situation with your family." As if on cue, a knock sounded at the back door. Matthew smiled. "That would be Carlos." Carlos! The name was vaguely familiar. "Carlos Ramirez," Matthew explained. "He's been your grandparents' estate manager and handyman for 15 years. He lives in the guest house at the back of the property." I opened the door to find a man in his early 50s, salt and pepper hair, kind eyes. He held his hat respectfully. "Miss Natalie," he said warmly, "I'm very sorry about your grandparents. They were wonderful people. I saw your car this morning and wanted to check if you needed anything." His simple kindness, his genuine concern, nearly brought me to tears again. "Thank you, Carlos. I'm a bit overwhelmed, to be honest." Carlos nodded. "Mr. Harold and Mrs. Elizabeth worried about that. They asked me to look after you if anything happened to them. The house, the grounds, everything is maintained. I've been keeping watch." Matthew invited Carlos to join us. Over the next hour, Carlos shared stories about my grandparents I'd never heard, painting a picture of 2 people deeply respected and beloved by those who worked for them, not just by their entitled relatives. "Your father and brother," Carlos said carefully, "they came here after the funeral, when no one was around. They took things, watches, jewelry, some electronics. I have it all on the security cameras." My stomach clenched. I'd forgotten. My father had installed an extensive security system for my grandparents years ago, supposedly for their protection. Carlos shook his head sadly. "They didn't know Mr. Harold had me update the system last year. He didn't trust the old one your father put in. Said it had too many blind spots." Matthew made a note. "That footage could be devastating if they pursued legal action." "There's more," Carlos continued. "Mrs. Elizabeth kept detailed journals. She documented everything, especially family visits and interactions. They're in her study." I followed Carlos to my grandmother's small study. A built-in bookcase held dozens of leather-bound journals, each meticulously dated. Carlos pulled one from the shelf and handed it to me. "This one mentions when your father asked for money last year," he said, "for some investment opportunity." I opened the journal, recognizing Grandma's elegant handwriting instantly. "May 15th, I read aloud. "Richard visited today, first time in 7 months. Did not ask about our health or lives. Immediately launched into pitch about cryptocurrency investment, requiring $250,000. When Harold refused, Richard became hostile. Accused us of preferring Natalie. Said we were naive to trust her when she only visits to secure her inheritance. Could not be more wrong. Natalie has never asked for money. Has no idea of our net worth. Brings food every Sunday and stays to eat with us." Richard left without finishing his coffee. Harold very upset afterward. Entry after entry. Years of my father demanding money, my brother pitching absurd business ideas, my mother making thinly veiled comments about their modest lifestyle being embarrassing to her social standing. In stark contrast, my visits were described with genuine warmth. Grandma noted small gifts I'd brought, conversations we'd shared, help I'd offered around the house. She saw me in a way my parents never had. As I read, the doorbell rang. Carlos answered it, returning with an older woman in a practical dress and cardigan. "Dorothy Reynolds," he introduced her. "Your grandparents' housekeeper for 20 years. Dorothy hugged me tightly. "You look just like Elizabeth when she was young," she said, her voice soft. "She was so proud of you." Over the next several hours, more people arrived. Rosa Martinez, my grandparents' business partner, who knew every detail of Alexander logistics and offered to guide me. George Patel, their investment advisor, who brought comprehensive portfolios showing exactly how my inheritance was structured. Sarah Johnson, their neighbor for 30 years, who brought a homemade casserole and shared stories about neighborhood gatherings I'd attended as a child. Each person brought not just information, but genuine affection. They had all loved my grandparents, and by extension, cared about me and my well-being. While going through my grandmother's desk, Dorothy found a hidden compartment containing letters from my father spanning decades. Each one a request for money, some with thinly veiled threats about cutting off my access to my grandparents if they refused. She also kept this, Dorothy said, handing me a USB drive. Security footage from after the funeral. Your mother was going through Elizabeth's jewelry before the reception even ended. She took several valuable pieces, claiming Elizabeth would have wanted her to have them. My grandparents, it seemed, had been meticulously documenting my family's behavior for years, as if they knew this day would come. They hadn't just created a financial safety net for me, they built an entire network of support and evidence to protect their wishes. Around 4 in the afternoon, as Matthew guided me through complex financial documents, my phone pinged. A text from Jason. Hope you're enjoying Grandma and Grandpa's house while you can. Dad, Mom, Aunt Pam, Uncle Steve, and I are coming over tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock to collect what rightfully belongs to us. Better not try to stop us, or things will get ugly. I showed the message to Matthew. His expression darkened. Threats and potential breaking and entering, he muttered. I think it's time to activate the final part of your grandparents' plan. He made several quick phone calls, speaking cryptically about meetings and evidence. When he finished, he turned to me, his expression determined. Your grandparents anticipated this exact scenario, Natalie. They knew Richard and the others wouldn't accept their decision. They prepared for it. Tomorrow morning, we'll be ready for them. But tonight, I suggest you review these materials so you understand exactly what you're fighting for. He gestured to the pile of journals, financial documents, and legal papers spread across the dining room table. Your grandparents built more than just wealth. They built relationships based on trust and respect. That is their true legacy to you. As everyone except Carlos left for the evening, promising to return the next morning, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't alone. My grandparents had ensured that. They had given me not just their money, but their wisdom, their community. I spent the evening reading, learning about my grandparents in a new way. They had been strategic, thoughtful, meticulous. Everything they did was deliberate, including their choice of heir. For the first time since the will reading, I felt equal to the responsibility they'd entrusted me with. I would not let them down. As I prepared for bed, another text from Jason. Better sleep with one eye open, sis. Tomorrow, you'll see what happens to people who steal from this family. Instead of fear, a hard resolve settled within me. Tomorrow would indeed show what happens when people try to steal from family, but not in the way Jason imagined. I woke early the next morning, my stomach a knot of anxiety, but beneath it a steely resolve. By 8 a.m., Matthew was back, with coffee, pastries, and a thick folder of legal documents. These are restraining orders, ready to be filed, he explained. And these are cease and desist letters for Jason's threats. Dorothy, my grandparents' amazing housekeeper, arrived next, immediately taking over the kitchen, the familiar smells of bacon and coffee a strange comfort before the storm. By 9:30, the house was filled. Carlos, my silent guardian, positioned himself by the front door. Rosa Martinez, my grandparents' business partner, had her laptop set up at the dining table, ready to present financial evidence. Dorothy bustled around, ensuring everyone had coffee and food, her presence a living link to my grandparents' generous hospitality. At 9:45, cars started pulling into the long driveway. First, my father's black luxury sedan, then my mother's gleaming white SUV, followed by Aunt Pam and Uncle Steve's convertible, their midlife crisis car. And finally, Jason's impractical sports car, which he could only afford because my parents paid his rent. "They're early," Matthew observed, trying to catch us off guard. The doorbell rang, aggressively, then pounding. Matthew nodded to Carlos, who opened the door. My father stood on the threshold, momentarily surprised to see someone other than me. Behind him, the rest of my family clustered, their expressions a mix of anger, entitlement, and smug satisfaction. "Where is Natalie?" my father demanded, his voice sharp. "This is family business." Carlos, unmovable, just said, "Miss Natalie is expecting you. Please come in." They filed into the foyer, stopping dead when they saw the gathering in the living room. I stood in the center, Matthew just behind me. "What is this?" my mother shrieked, her voice brittle. "You brought outsiders into a private family matter." Before I could answer, the front door opened again. 3 more people entered. First, Judge Robert Henderson, a tall, dignified man in his 70s, a friend of my grandparents for decades. He was followed by Police Chief Maria Williams, whose daughter's education had been supported by my grandparents' charitable foundation. Last was Thomas Jang, my grandparents' financial advisor for over 20 years. My father's face went pale at the sight of Judge Henderson. The judge had ruled against him in a business dispute years earlier, a case my father had tried and failed to influence with his social connections. "Robert," he stammered, attempting a jovial tone that fell completely flat. "What brings you here?" The judge's expression remained stern. "I am here at the request of Harold and Elizabeth Alexander, through their attorney, Matthew Goldstein. They asked me, in the event of their deaths, to serve as an impartial witness to any family disputes regarding their estate." My mother turned to Chief Williams. "This is ridiculous. We're here to collect family heirlooms that rightfully belong to us. Why is law enforcement present?" The chief smiled thinly. "I am here as a friend of the Alexander family, Mrs. Alexander, not in an official capacity. Unless, of course, someone commits a crime, in which case my official duties would naturally take precedence." The implied threat was not lost on anyone. As if on cue, the back door opened, and 6 more people entered, forming a semicircle behind me. Longtime employees from my grandparents' business. People who had known my father since he was a child, who had watched his transformation from entitled son to absent family member. "You've got to be kidding me," Jason muttered, looking genuinely intimidated. "Is this supposed to intimidate us?" I stepped forward, finding strength in the army of support surrounding me. "I know why you're here," I said, my voice clear and steady. "You believe you are entitled to my grandparents' estate, despite their explicit wishes. You think you can bully or threaten me into giving you what you want." My father's face hardened. "Those old fools were manipulated. We're simply here to correct that injustice." From behind me, Thomas Jang spoke up, his voice calm, but with an edge of steel. "Actually, Richard, I have documentation of every attempt you made to access your parents' assets over the last 20 years. He opened a folder. "This includes the unauthorized transfer attempt from their retirement account in 2016, the forged check incident in 2018, and your attempt to have Elizabeth declared incompetent last year after she refused to fund Jason's failed cryptocurrency venture." My father's face drained of color. That's taken out of context." Rosa Martinez stepped forward, tablet in hand. "I also have records of the company loan you never repaid, Richard. $200,000, borrowed in 2012 for your vacation home in Aspen. Your parents never pursued repayment, though they certainly could have." One by one, my grandparents' friends and associates presented their evidence. Each piece a damning indictment of my family's greed, contrasted with their minimal involvement in my grandparents' actual lives. Aunt Pam, who had been quietly fuming, suddenly turned on me, her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little snake. You turned our parents against us, poisoned them with lies." Judge Henderson cleared his throat. "Actually, Mrs. Davis, I reviewed the video journals Elizabeth kept. There was no external influence. Your parents were quite clear about their reasoning." "This is all very theatrical," my mother sneered, trying to regain some control. "But it changes nothing. We will contest the will. We will win." Matthew stepped forward. "I have prepared documentation for you all. It includes evidence that would become public record if you contest the will." He handed each family member a thick envelope. "This includes banking records, text messages, emails, and video evidence of your interactions with Harold and Elizabeth over the past decade. I encourage you to review it before making decisions about legal action." Uncle Steve, silent until now, opened his envelope. His face grew increasingly pale as he read. After a moment, He touched Aunt Pam's arm. "We should go," he said quietly. "This is not a fight we can win." She shrugged him off angrily, but his words hung in the air. My father, however, had gone completely still after scanning the contents of his own envelope. There were records of business dealings he had clearly hoped would remain private, along with transcripts of cruel comments he'd made about his parents when he thought no one was listening. Chief Williams stepped forward. "I should also mention that this property is under 24-hour security surveillance. Any attempt to remove items without permission would constitute theft." Carlos nodded. "The new system records everything, inside and out, all backed up to secure cloud storage." As my family absorbed the implications, I walked to the sideboard and picked up a stack of documents Matthew had prepared. "These are cease and desist orders regarding the threats you have made," I said, passing them to Jason. "These," I continued, handing papers to my father, "are notices that I am aware of the items taken from this house after the funeral and expect their immediate return." My mother began to protest, but I cut her off. "And these," I said, giving her the final document, "are the terms under which I am willing to maintain any relationship with you all going forward. They include respect for my grandparents' wishes and an end to all attempts to contest the will." The room fell silent. My family finally understood the trap they were in. Not only had my grandparents legally protected their decisions, they had anticipated and documented every possible challenge. The community of support they had built stood firmly with me, presenting a united front my family had never expected. My father was the first to break. "This is not over," he muttered, but the defeat in his voice was palpable. "Actually, Richard, it is," Judge Henderson replied. "Your parents were meticulous in their planning. Any judge in this county would uphold their wishes based on the evidence they compiled." One by one, my family members retreated toward the door, their threats dissolving in the face of the overwhelming evidence. Jason glared at me as he passed. "This is not the end," he muttered. "Perhaps not," I replied calmly, "but it is the end of you taking advantage of his family. My grandparents saw who you really are. That's why we are all here today." As they stumbled out to their luxury cars, the tension in the room finally dissipated. Dorothy immediately began serving fresh coffee and pastries, as if to cleanse the space of their negative energy. The others gathered around, offering congratulations and support. I felt strangely empty, not triumphant, not devastated. I had stood my ground, protected my grandparents' wishes, but lost what remained of my family in the process. The victory felt hollow. Judge Henderson seemed to sense my conflict. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Your grandparents would be proud, Natalie, not just of what you did today, but how you did it, with dignity and principle." Rosa nodded in agreement. "You are more like them than anyone else in the family. That's why they trusted you with everything." As my family's cars disappeared down the driveway, I realized I had crossed a threshold. The family I had known was gone, but in their place stood a community bound by genuine respect and shared values, the true legacy my grandparents had built over a lifetime. It wasn't the family I was born into, but perhaps it was the family I was meant to have all along. 6 months have passed since that day. 6 months that feel like a lifetime. The first few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork, financial decisions, and the raw, painful acceptance that my biological family had truly chosen money over any relationship with me. They made a few half-hearted attempts at reconciliation, but only when they needed something, proving that absolutely nothing had changed. With Matthew's guidance and my grandparents' advisors, I established the Elizabeth and Harold Alexander Foundation for Education, dedicating $10 million to supporting underprivileged students and schools in our community. We focus on arts, education, and vocational training, areas my grandparents always believed were undervalued. And yes, I went back to teaching kindergarten. Many people were shocked, thinking I'd quit now that I was wealthy. But why would I? My classroom at Sunshine Elementary became a living testament to what's possible with proper resources. I personally funded new books, art supplies, technology the school budget could never cover. Every child gets healthy snacks daily, warm winter coats if they need them. Small expenses for me, but they make a universe of difference in those kids' lives. Under Rosa Martinez's mentorship, I've learned the basics of running Alexander Logistics. I don't take an active management role, but I ensure the company continues to uphold my grandparents' values including their profit-sharing program for employees and generous retirement benefits. The business thrives, providing stable employment for over 100 people in our community. My grandparents' house, once so painfully empty, gradually became a home again. I moved from the guest room into the master bedroom, though it took months before I could sleep there without feeling like an intruder. With Carlos's help, I renovated the large basement into a community space for foundation events and educational programs. Dorothy still comes 3 times a week. She refuses to fully retire, no matter how much I insist she's earned it. My original family still makes occasional attempts to re-establish contact, but their motives are always transparent. My father calls when his company faces cash flow problems, hinting broadly about short-term loans with handsome returns. My mother reached out when her social circle learned about my foundation, suddenly wanting to serve on the board. Jason texts when his latest venture inevitably fails, asking for startup capital. Aunt Pam calls around the holidays, suggesting families should be together, especially family with large houses suitable for hosting gatherings. Each time, I politely but firmly maintain my boundaries, referring them to the terms I established after the confrontation. I would consider a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine care, but not one based on financial advantage. None of them, to this day, have been able to meet those simple terms. Instead, I've built new traditions with the chosen family my grandparents cultivated. Sunday dinners continue, but now I host, with a rotating group of guests: Rosa, Matthew, Carlos and his family, Dorothy, and others who were part of my grandparents' circle. We celebrate holidays together, share milestones, and support each other through difficulties. It wasn't the family I was born into, but it's a community bound by something far stronger than DNA: shared values and genuine affection. One crisp autumn morning, so similar to the day of their accident, I finally visited my grandparents' graves for the first time since the funeral. I brought fresh flowers and sat on the small bench nearby, ready to have the conversation I'd been avoiding. "I'm trying my best to honor what you built," I told them, feeling only slightly foolish for speaking aloud. "The foundation is making a difference. 3 students have already received full college scholarships who otherwise couldn't have gone. Your employees still speak about you with such respect." A gentle breeze rustled the nearby trees, sending golden leaves spiraling downward. It was the kind of beautiful fall day my grandmother had loved, perfect for baking and reading by the fireplace. "I wish you were here to see it all," I continued. "I have so many questions about decisions you made, investments you chose, people you helped, but I'm figuring it out, step by step." In the months since inheriting, I discovered numerous quiet charities my grandparents had supported anonymously. Children whose medical bills they'd paid, families whose homes they'd saved from foreclosure, employees whose children they'd put through college, all without public recognition or praise. "Thank you for trusting me," I whispered. "I understand now why you made the choice you did. It was never really about the money. It was about values, about using resources for something meaningful rather than status or power." As I sat there, memories washed over me, not with the sharp pain of recent grief, but with a bittersweet appreciation for the time we had shared. Grandpa teaching me to fish, Grandma showing me how to make her famous apple pie, both of them attending every school play and graduation when my parents were too busy. The inheritance had never been primarily about money. It had been about entrusting me with their legacy, their values, their vision of what wealth could accomplish when used with purpose and compassion. The next day, I hosted the Foundation's first major event, a scholarship ceremony for 20 high school seniors who would receive full college funding. As I watched these bright, determined young people accept opportunities that would change their entire trajectories, I felt my grandparents' presence strongly. Among the recipients was Maria Vasquez, a brilliant young woman who reminded me so much of myself at that age, full of potential, but limited by financial constraints. She plans to become a teacher, to give back to her community, just as she had been supported. As the event concluded, Maria approached me, tears in her eyes. "My parents both work 2 jobs," she said. "No one in my family has ever gone to college. This changes everything, not just for me, but for my younger siblings, who now see it as possible." In that moment, I understood completely what my grandparents had been building all along. Not just a business or a fortune, but a legacy of positive impact. A ripple effect that would continue long after they were gone. They had trusted me to amplify that effect, to carry their values forward in ways they would never see, but had envisioned. The money had indeed revealed true colors, showing me who valued wealth over relationships. But it had also revealed a community of genuine connection, people who had loved my grandparents for who they were, not what they owned. That was the true inheritance, more valuable than any dollar amount. As I move forward, I continue teaching, running the foundation, and learning the business. The wealth allows me to amplify good work, but it doesn't define me. I still live relatively simply, drive a practical car, and spend weekends volunteering rather than shopping. My grandparents would approve, I think. They always said money was a tool, not a goal. I finally, truly understand what they meant. So tell me, what's your experience with family and inheritance? Have you ever had to stand up to pressure from loved ones to do what you knew was right? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like and share it with someone who might need encouragement to stand their ground. Remember, family is about love and respect, not obligation or advantage. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the strength to honor your own values, whatever challenges you may face.